Speaker Paul Ryan, who happens to be a Republican, broke with the president on this question of getting rid of the 14th Amendment right to citizenship. Let's watch.
President Trump raising some eyebrows today, talking about an executive order ending birthright citizenship. Where do you stand on that?
Well, you obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution.
Well, in response to that, President Trump tweeted Paul Ryan should be focusing on holding the majority rather than giving his opinions on birthright citizenship, something he knows nothing about. Our new Republican majority will work on this, closing the immigration loopholes and securing our border. What is he talking about, Susan?
So let's just picture this. 6 days before an election, he's attacking the top-ranking Republican
in an attempt to hold the House.
And not an attempt to hold the House. I don't think this issue helps with the House. I think this issue helps him hold the Senate.
Well, what's his motive here?
So his motive here is that he doesn't like to be criticized by anybody. And even if you're Paul Ryan and the Speaker of the House and you publicly split with him, then he's going to attack you. But it is a remarkable political strategy this close to an election.
It seems to me, Jason, and you know this as well as I do, the way our Constitution was compromised in the beginning on slavery and things like that, we've noticed about those imperfections, those flaws, you might say, those real moral flaws. It has this thing where to justify the Union and to keep everybody together, you have to give a special plug, a little break for the smaller state. For people who live in North Dakota, for example. Right. But North Dakota gets 2 senators, as they should under the Constitution. Nobody's fighting with that now. But if Trump focuses on geography, which he's really focusing on now, giving up on popularity, this election, when it comes to popular votes, is going to be going Democrat. But he's trying to hold North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri, maybe squeak it in Florida. That's what he's up to.
That's what he's up to.
And to hold the Senate.
Yeah, he's going to hold the Senate. Like I said, that's what's going to protect him. The problem is, and I think this has been more clear in this election than almost any other, he has a backlash where he shows up, right? This conversation, look.
Well, he can't go to the northeast suburbs right now. He can't go to the real Midwest suburbs.
He's not invited in those places. Look, Scott Walker.
He wasn't invited to Pittsburgh.
Exactly.
All right.
Scott Walker has slowly pulled back into a tie with Evers. He had been down all through this year. Donald Trump refocusing on Wisconsin is going to help Evers and help push Democrats because they're like, oh, my gosh, Trump is attacking us again.
I think Evers wins that one?
I think Evers is going to squeak it out. I think this is the kind of thing that ends up harming Republicans.
Couple bucks on that after the show? Huh? The punditry matters.
I think Evers is going to pull it off. I think the Democrats are going to win in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and I also think they're going to win Ohio.
Let's go to Elise. I want to talk to you about this question of how close these are. But look at this. President Trump's campaign to change the U.S. Constitution got an enforcement today from his chief counselor, Kellyanne Conway. Let's listen to her. She is very supportive of the president.
There are constitutional scholars who say the 14th Amendment has been misinterpreted, and actually the Supreme Court has never gave a solid opinion on this.
It's never given a solid opinion on the fact that when you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States. Anyway, her husband, George Conway, happens to be a prominent conservative lawyer, an expert on the Constitution, doesn't agree with his wife. In an opinion piece co-authored with Neil Katyal, the former acting Solicitor General under President Obama, Conway argued that the president's move would be unconstitutional and would certainly be challenged, and the challengers would undoubtedly win and exceeds the scope of his authority. The president can't just... well, at least he just can't get rid of the right to citizenship for people born in the United States. I mean, that would be a hell of a power you'd hold. You know, you are not a citizen. I declare you, Elise, are not a citizen, even though you're born here. I declare that as president.
We probably would like to do that, Chris. He might like to do that for both of us, technically speaking, but he's just simply not able to. And this is just Donald Trump throwing spaghetti at the wall. He's trying to see what's going to stick. But this isn't even something that actually resonates with the base from what I heard and observed just this last week in California.
I think, Susan, even people who think we ought to do something about immigration, and I'm one who believes we better regulate it reasonably, and I don't think the Democrats have moved up to the plate on that at all. They did try in 2013, but they haven't tried since. They're not sitting around saying a baby born here should be American.
Yeah.
Because if you start playing with that stuff, you're playing with our basic Constitution. Yeah.
And you actually saw pushback from some Republicans, but pretty rare. A Republican congressman from Florida, Congressman Curbelo, issued a tweet that expressed concern about the president's position. He's a Republican.
I think Stephen King probably likes it.
Yeah, Stephen
Because he's talking about people with calves like cantaloupes or something coming up here.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.